morning, good afternoon, good evening. I've said on this platform that Zimbabwe is a failed state. What do I mean by that? Well, a failed state is one that is failing to provide a decent life, freedom, basic human rights to its own people. In Zimbabwe, in 1980, when we gained our independence, the country was economically considered an upper middle income nation. That means our GDP per capita was comparable to what South Africa is today. 6,000 US dollars. And yet now it has dropped to 2,000 and is still dropping. Our people still live in abject poverty. We should have upgraded our homes so that our people can live in decent homes and not mud hovels, grass-thatched mud hovels. While the quality of life of Zimbabweans in 1980 was on the up, it has since been sliding downwards as the nation's GDP dropped. Our basic infrastructure, they followed the same route. We had roads, number of decent roads in the country, but most of them now they're pitted with potholes. In the urban centers, at least, we're running water. Now, even some of the people in the urban centers go for months on end without clean water from the tap. The whole country's economy is in collapse. And the root cause for it is that we have failed to hold those in positions of power and authority to account. So we've been caught up in this meaningless cycle where we are all but stuck with the same corrupt, incompetent individuals. That is our problem. While other nations are able to end a failed government, to remove it, in our case, they are not able to do that. With the first national leader after post-independence, Mugabe, he stayed in power for 37 years before we finally managed to put him out. And it was through a military coup. And right now, we've got Mnangagwa. He came in through the coup and has been rigging elections to stay in power. And now he wants to extend his stay in power, his illegitimate mandate, by changing the constitution that says he can only stay in power for a maximum of 2 terms. He wants to change that. The country right now is preoccupied with that debate. As much as the nation would want to concentrate on the issues, the bread and butter issues that affect the majority of the people, like it or not, the regime sets the agenda. And so we are stuck in this debate of Mnangagwa pushing to stay in power until 2030. It is a nightmare. And I think the people are getting to the point where they really don't know what to do. And indeed, what can you do? I think the original source of our problem is the fight for independence itself. We glorified the armed struggle without seriously stopping to think what kind of leaders will an armed struggle bring. Because if we did, we would have had them at least be prepared to do something to stop them. An armed struggle can and has often thrown up the hawks, the leaders who believe they have the divine right to rule. And when you are confronted with a leader like that, what do you expect the unarmed, ordinary civilian to do? That is exactly what we were faced with in 1980. When Mugabe and his cronies came back from the Lancaster House talks and started the campaign for the 1980 elections, they made it very clear that if the party does not win the election, the Bush war would continue. In other words, the gun that had been used to fight the white men, to end white colonial rule, now suddenly was being turned on the defenseless civilians. And the people, of course, had no choice but to vote to end the Bush war. Little did they know that this was only the beginning of their problems. Because if there's anything that people should understand, is that you never appease a dictator. The more you try to appease him, the more you'll only come back to demand more. And that is exactly what happened. Because in 1980, when ZANU-PF got into power, they started planning on how to consolidate that power. They launched the 1983 to 1987 Kukurawondi massacre. This was primarily targeting PF SAPU and their supporters to force that party to give up its aspiration as an independent political entity, because PF SAPO was the only real serious challenge, political challenge to SANU-PF. PF SAPO finally relented in 1987 and signed the Unity Accord. And the massacre stopped. And Mugabe now had the opportunity to impose the de facto one-party state that he had always wanted. And this eroded the people's right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country even further. Because now supporting the opposition was considered to be undermining the country's unity. And that the price of that was pretty high. The opposition leaders themselves were considered to be puppets of the West seeking regime change. And that meant they could be ill-treated, arrested, harassed, and some even killed. It is interesting to note that SANU-PF has never changed. As the years went by, the party became more and more greedy. The more the nation gave them, the more they demanded. I think it is no exaggeration that 45 years after independence, we in Zimbabwe are yet to hold free, fair, and credible elections. And yet this was recognized even then, before independence, as one of the key requirements, key demands in our fight for independence. One man, one vote. And now, while the whites denied the blacks the vote, we find ourselves in a situation where the blacks are denying fellow blacks a meaningful vote. What a nightmare. And to be quite honest, at the present moment, there doesn't seem to be any chance at all of breaking that mold, because the nation had the opportunity to do so, the golden opportunity, one might say, in 2008 to 2013. But alas, the opposition leaders, they had elected to carry out the important task of implementing the reforms, turned out to be corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless. Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends failed to implement even one token reform during the GNU. Why? Well, Mugabe bribed them with the tokens, with the trappings of high office, the E-Class Mercedes-Benz for the ministers and deputy ministers, the very generous salaries and allowances. And for Morgan Tsvangirai, the US $4 million Highlands mansion, etc., etc. And they all but forgot about the reforms. It is no exaggeration that the opposition in Zimbabwe is all but this ZANU-PF Team B. They've played to make sure Team A wins and to make sure that Team A gets legitimacy. And it's not as if they don't know it. They know it themselves. And they've readily admitted it themselves. The tragedy for Zimbabwe is the people themselves have failed to see the opposition leaders for who they really are: corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless. The MDC CCC leaders have been on the political platform for the last 25 years. It is shocking that many Zimbabweans out there don't even know why they've been risking all to elect these leaders, these opposition leaders, into power. Because if they did, they would realize by now that while the primary purpose of the MDC CCC leaders was to implement the democratic reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections, they would know 2023 ZANU-PF blatantly rigged those elections. Proof that no meaningful reforms had been implemented. And therefore, then the people themselves would realize that they need to elect competent opposition leaders. But alas, millions of Zimbabweans out there have no clue that MDC leaders, CCC leaders have sold out. MDC leaders have been participating in these flawed elections out of greed. As David Coulthard confirmed in the quotation, the full quotation is being shown at the bottom of your screen there. And they've conned people to participate in these flawed elections to give ZANU-PF legitimacy out of greed. But to the people, of course, we couldn't tell them that we are participating in these elections out of greed. So they told them the idiotic lie that the opposition would win rigged elections. We don't need reforms anymore because we can win rigged elections, which was, of course, nonsense. But there lies the problem. The people themselves did not, some people even today, they would not agree that Chamisa lied to them about plugging vote rigging loopholes. They will accept that the elections were rigged, but they refuse to accept that Chamisa lied. How they square that circle, make us believe. Of course, Chamisa lied. He himself admits afterwards that the elections were rigged. So if the elections were rigged, and you are the one who said you plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, you lied then. But that's where we are. There is a price to be paid by the people's failure to really take the trouble to understand what democracy is all about and their role in it. The ancient Greeks were right. Democracy, as the government of the people, by the people, for the people, only works if the people are educated, they're knowledgeable, they are objective, and they are diligent in their duty to hold those in public office to account. I think it would be fair to say the Zimbabwe electorate has proven to be ignorant, naive, and very gullible. No wonder our democratic credentials are very poor, as you can see from the map there. On a score of 1 to 10, we hardly score more than 10. That's the tragedy of Africa. That's where we are. Thank you very much for joining me today. Have a nice day.